All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We'll get started in just a moment. I know folks are just trickling in at the moment. And good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our community meeting tonight. We're going to give it a couple more minutes just to let folks join and get settled in. All right. Good evening once again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this community meeting for the City of San Jose's SB9 Objective Design Standards Project. We're going to just wait one more second here. Make sure that we've got everyone we need. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So before we get started, I'll just go over a few instructions on how to participate in the meeting this evening. During the discussion portion of the meeting, you can use the raise hand icon if you would like to speak. And when it's your turn, we'll go ahead and unmute you. If you're joining us by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand, and then you can press *6 to unmute you once you've been called upon to speak. We'll go over these instructions again when we begin the discussion portion. You can also use the Q&A function and type in your question. And just a note that we will address those written questions later in the meeting. And now I'm going to go over how to access the language interpretation feature during this meeting. So first, in your webinar controls, click Interpretation. This button is typically at the bottom of your screen, but it might depend on the device you're using where you see that button. Second, you're going to select the language you would like to hear: English, Spanish, Chinese, or Vietnamese. Please note that all attendees must select a language. Even if you're listening to this meeting in English, you will need to select English in the interpretation controls. I think we are still waiting on our Chinese interpretation to get started, but give us a few moments and we should have that activated. So once again, even if you are listening in English, you must go ahead and select English. And now we have some videos to share that describe how to use the interpretation feature. You may need to turn up the volume on your device in order to hear those videos better. So we'll go ahead and listen to those.
您好，感谢您参加今天的会议。若需要使用 Zoom 的语言翻译，请点击 Zoom 窗口下方的地球图标，然后选择您所需要的语言。为了让您能够清楚地听到翻译语音，我们建议您选择关闭原本语音的选项。请点击地球图标后，选单上的最后一个选项。
Hola y bienvenidos a esta reunión. Para acceder a la función de interpretación, haga clic en el icono del globo en la parte inferior de la ventana de Zoom y selecciona el idioma que desea. Para escuchar claramente el audio de interpretación, le recomendamos que también seleccione la opción para silenciar el audio original, que es la opción más baja en el menú después de hacer clic en el icono del globo. Hola y bienvenidos.
Xin chào và cảm ơn quý vị đã tham dự buổi họp ngày hôm nay. Để truy cập vào phần thông dịch của ứng dụng Zoom, xin nhấn vào biểu tượng hình quả địa cầu ở phía dưới của màn hình và chọn ngôn ngữ theo ý muốn của quý vị. Để nghe rõ lời phiên dịch, chúng tôi khuyến khích quý vị chọn chức năng tắt âm thanh gốc nằm ở phía cuối trong phần tùy chọn của biểu tượng quả địa cầu. Xin
Okay, and now I'm going to turn it over to Martina for some introductions.
So hello, everyone, and I just want to thank everyone for being here this evening. So tonight we're going to have our introductory meeting on our SB9 project. So tonight the purpose is to really introduce you all to the project, give you some background, let you know what we're working on, and then take initial feedback, comments, questions, let us know things you're concerned about, what you want us to look at as we develop standards around this project. So just quick introductions. I'll just kind of run through it really quickly. From the city team, we have myself, we have Aparna and Rena, and then we are assisted by our consultant, ACOM. We have Susan, Chandra, Laura, and then Scott, who will be doing most of our presentation tonight. So again, thank you very much for joining us. We hope you get some information out of this first meeting, and this will be a great opportunity. Get any questions out there and receive your initial feedback on, get some ideas from the community.
Thanks, Martina. And we're looking forward to hearing some of the input and local knowledge you all have to share. And for that reason, today we'd like to spend most of the time hearing from you. Today, as Martina mentioned, is intended to provide you with information about how the project and hear from you on what you think is important as we develop standards that relate to SB9 development for San Jose specifically. So of the talking the project team will do today, it will be to cover things like some of the city's project goals and provide an overview. We wanted to provide an overview of SB9 itself, so you have that context. We wanted to also show some SB9 development scenarios of what might result under this Senate bill, provide an overview of the existing San Jose SB9 regulations, and share the project timeline to outline how you can continue to be involved. So we have a brief poll to do quickly, which will just take a minute or so. You should see it pop up on your screen any second now. What we're asking here is just what level of familiarity you have with Senate Bill 9. And that's really just to sort of understand who's in the room and how much background we might want to give here. Understanding different people have different levels of familiarity with it. Some may have just heard of it. Some may have a strong familiarity. So we'll give you a minute or so there to see the results trickling in. Okay, we still have results coming in, I think. It looks like most people might have put an answer in. I'll go ahead and continue on here then. So it looks like a slight majority of people have quite a lot of familiarity with SB9. There's some folks joining us that haven't heard of SB9 before, and that's great. We want to provide some context there, particularly with this first community meeting. Some others have some knowledge of SB9, and I see we have some professionals here as well, which is great. We've got a good mix of attendees, so thanks for that. By way of introduction, we'd now like to provide context of the project. This should take about 25 minutes before we get into some of the discussion. So firstly, why are we here? The San Jose City Council has asked staff to look at how SB9 is applied in the city, including a number of aspects, including how SB9 development can contribute to the city's housing goals, how the city can retain neighborhood character in zones where SB9 is being applied, create objective development standards, which are development rules that are clear and measurable and are intended to provide certainty to neighbors, the neighborhood, and developers. Also, they ask that the city staff engage with the community to share information and obtain input. So these points in particular, the development of standards and community engagement are the basis of the current project and the reason we're here tonight. So just to give you some top lines here at the outset, SB9 was signed into law as part of the state's Housing Opportunity and More Efficiency Act in 2021. The bill requires the city to approve certain housing projects in low density zones across the state and is seeking to encourage infill housing. We'll cover some more about this in the next few slides' time. So ultimately, what can SB9 allow a property owner to do? Where a site can qualify for SB9, an owner may propose one or both of the following. You can subdivide a lot to create two lots, or you can construct or you can construct two units in a detached form or an attached form as a duplex development. So when a project such as the above is proposed and it meets all the requirements, the city is required to process it within the requirements set out within SB9.
Scott,
So-
if you don't mind, sorry, if I could just interrupt you for a moment. I just want to let our attendees know that our Chinese interpretation is now available.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Appreciate it. So importantly, some of those requirements of the city include that the city must process applications that meet the basic requirements of SB9 ministerially. So that means the city cannot apply any discretion to the review of those projects. And this is intended to lead to a streamlined process for the permitting of these projects. The city can add standards to guide development, but it must not impose requirements that would prevent a project from constructing two 800 square foot units on a site that qualifies for SB9. The city also cannot require parking for projects within a half mile of transit or within a block of a car sharing vehicle. So just to show you some scenarios under which SB9 might eventuate, we'll go into some of those now. So in this series of slides, we'll step through the progression of diagrams on the right to illustrate the various scenarios that might come about for development using this bill. It is important for this project to understand what is possible because there's a range of possibilities that property owners could pursue to effectively create standards or guidelines for this type of development for the city to apply and property owners to follow. So first, to address a typical SB9 lot split or subdivision proposal. On the right, you can see an existing lot that contains an existing house. In this instance, the lot has been split in two or subdivided using SB9. The existing house now sits on the front lot, and the rear lot shown with the dotted lines can be otherwise sold separately or developed by the owner. If this hypothetical were to check all the boxes of SB9 on a particular site, the city would be required to process and approve it ministerially. So just to cover a couple of the lot split scenario limitations that SB9 includes for someone that was pursuing that lot split scenario, the lots must be roughly of similar size, and that must be no less than 60-40 in the ratio of those lots and how they eventuate. And you can see that highlighted in red. Neither lot can be below 1,200 square feet in size unless the city decides it would like to permit something smaller, and the city is not. For a lot split, the owner must live on one of the lots for at least 3 years. And each site must be adequately serviced with utilities and provide access to the street for occupants. The example here shows that access via an easement connecting to the street. So next, the second mechanism that SB9 provides for, let's look at the typical 2-unit development outcome that is available. So at the top right, you can see an outcome of a vacant site that has been developed into a duplex or 2 units that in this instance are attached, and those are highlighted in the darker blue color. Another scenario in which this could eventuate is at the bottom right, and you can see an outcome of an existing dwelling in the lighter blue color. And in this case, the owner might have decided to retain that existing dwelling and add a detached SB9 unit to the rear, which you can see in the darker blue color. Now, it is possible under SB9 to combine the two scenarios we just looked at if the site meets the requirements. On the right is an existing lot with an existing dwelling, shown in the lighter shade of blue. In this instance, the owner has, firstly, they have subdivided the lot into Secondly, they have adapted the existing single dwelling to contain a second attached dwelling, which is shown in the darker blue color. And third, they have added another duplex or 2 attached units in the new lot at the back, which is also highlighted in the darker blue color. So the result here is 4 units on the original lot, which is the maximum number of units allowed under SB9. So to show another variation of that outcome, SB9 was also designed to integrate with the ADU ordinance that is already in force in the city, and a lot of those provisions are also in force across the state. In the scenario at the top right, an owner has started with a vacant site and added a duplex or 2 attached units shown in the darker blue color. At the rear of the site, they have added 2 ADUs using the ADU ordinance highlighted in the yellow color. The owner in this scenario has elected not to subdivide. In the scenario at the bottom right, the owner has firstly subdivided the lot in 2. Secondly, they have adapted the existing single dwelling to contain a second attached dwelling, shown in the darker blue color. Third, they have added another single dwelling at the rear under SB9, which is also highlighted in the darker blue color. And fourth, they have added an ADU to that rear site as well, highlighted also in the yellow color. As with the previous slide, the result in these scenarios on the original lot is a maximum of 4 units. Whether those units are SB9 or ADU, the maximum is 4. So there are restrictions we should highlight as well on how some of those SB9 developments might be carried out. Firstly, a project may not alter or demolish affordable housing, rent-controlled housing, Ellis Act parcels, or units occupied by a tenant in the last 3 years. SB9 units cannot be used for short-term rental. The same landowner must not subdivide adjacent lots, and a lot can only be subdivided once using SB9. And these are all requirements that are in the state SB9 bill. So to cover some more restrictions that SB9 broadly outlines for sites that can participate utilizing this bill, sites may not be classified with things like protected farmland, wetland, high fire severity zones, floodways. They shouldn't be protected for conservation, protected species, and the state bill also outlines SB9 doesn't apply to historic sites. There are some limited exceptions to these exclusions in which an SB9 can be undertaken outside of these restrictions. So next, we just wanted to briefly show you or demonstrate what a physical example of an SB9 outcome might look like. So this is an SB9 development that was recently completed in the Los Angeles area. The project included retaining the existing dwelling at the front, which is the primary thing you can see here. They've also added a 2-story SB9 unit in the rear, and 2 ADUs exist behind that for a total of 4 dwellings on this site that you're looking at from the street. So here's the site layout. And for reference, the street is on the right, where we were just looking at the site from. The existing dwelling is highlighted in blue on the plan here. The new SB9 unit is in the middle and is highlighted in red. And 2 ADUs are at the rear, and you can see those in orange. And this example did not propose subdivision. These 4 dwellings are on 1 lot. So considering how a project would appear from the street is important to informing the character of the neighborhood and is important to how we come up with standards as well. So for our recently built example here, highlighted in the red dashed outline, you can see the SB9 development when viewed from the street. From this angle, it is largely hidden from view by the existing dwelling. So this picture was taken from the street as well, slightly to the left of the previous view. Again, the red dashed outline shows the new development. Here you can see a little more, and you can see the SB9 unit above the existing house, and one of the ADUs at the rear is also becoming visible here. So having run through that and some examples and different scenarios, we wanted to bring it back to what we're doing here. The city is seeking to achieve a number of goals related to SB9, and those include keeping in line with state law, including providing standards that are objective or verifiable and measurable standards for development to follow, They're seeking to implement policies of the 2040 General Plan and update current regulations to reflect the city's vision. They're seeking to apply standards consistently for infill projects in R1, but also extend this to zones that might accommodate similar infill type development, such as the R2 zone. They're also seeking to provide clear development standards, specifications, performance approaches, graphics, and representations to aid with public understanding for what SB9 enables. So just to speak further to these goals and how SB9 has been implemented over the 3 years since its introduction by the state, to date, the city has received 13 applications for SB9 dwellings or duplexes, and 3 of those have been approved. They've received 45 applications for SB9 lot splits, and 7 of those applications have been approved. So you saw this slide earlier, but with those goals and the implementation of SB9 to date in mind, the City of San Jose's City Council has asked staff to look at how SB9 is applied in the city, including how SB9 development can further contribute to housing obligations, how the city can retain neighborhood character in zones where SB9 is being applied, to create some more objective development standards for certainty to neighbors and developers, and to engage with the community to obtain information and input. So the project we're here talking about today is being conducted to develop materials to further those goals specifically. So as far as expanding opportunities for SB9 type development to occur, SB9 applies at a state level. It applies to single family residential zones only. The City Council, as part of their resolution, have directed staff to look into SB9 type standards that might also apply to the city's R2 zones, as well as how such standards might sensitively be applied to historic districts and resources. And this is a key direction in the undertaking of this project. So to elaborate a little bit on the City Council direction, staff were asked to look at allowing SB9 type developments in the city's historic districts and on sites containing historic resources. The council added that staff should ensure regulations disallow demolition of contributing or individually significant structures. Also, that when structures in historic districts are being split into 2 or more units, applicants are directed to follow the city's Your Old House historic guidelines to ensure minimal impact to the external structure. They also asked staff to ensure that SB9 implementation for R2 properties with a structure built before 1950 can move forward with a clear discretionary historic process in place. So to answer part of this question, a good thing to look at is how many sites are actually available for SB9 or an SB9 type development in the city. The map you're looking at here on the right is showing all of the R1 parcels in the city in the lighter yellow shade, and all of the R2 zone parcels you can see in a slightly darker yellow shade. And in total, the number of sites in the city that are zoned R1 and R2 is about 151,000 sites. The majority of those exist in the R1, which has about 143,400 of those sites. So to narrow that down a little further, I outlined a few slides back that certain sites are restricted from using SB9 when they have classifications like protected farmland, wetland, high fire hazard, floodways, restrictions like that. So when those sites are excluded from the count on the previous slide, there are about 133,700 sites in the city that might be eligible to pursue SB9 type development. And again, the majority are R1 sites, which is about 128,000 of those sites. So the City Council directed staff to look at how SB9 type standards might apply in historic districts. This map shows where the city's historic areas exist, outlined in yellow. There are a total of about 2,300 sites in historic districts that are also zoned R1 or R2 in the city of San Jose. Similarly, for historic resources, this map shows historic resources in the pink color. There are about 2,600 sites zoned R1 and R2 that are classified as historic resources. About 2,100 of those 2,600 are in the R1 zone. So it's important to note here also briefly that the city already has some standards that apply to SB9 development that could be replaced or built upon within the scope of this project. The city created an SB9 ordinance in 2022 in response to the introduction of the state bill, and it includes standards that regulate for lot splits, access arrangements, and frontage requirements, for instance. And for duplexes or dwelling units, it applies standards for height, cumulative floor area, frontages, those kinds of things. Just to expand on some of the detail of the city's existing standards, for example, here they're covering frontage requirements that seek to allow access to split lots. For example, thinner lots are required to have a 12 to 15-foot corridor to the street under the ordinance currently. There's some front setback requirements, and building height is limited in the current ordinance to 2 stories or 30 feet. So to give you an idea of the progress of the project and how you can continue to be involved, let's go into the timeline. So you're currently part of our first community meeting for the project, in which we'd like to gather your input to inform the future of the project. Another community meeting is planned for next month, when we hope to share some more detail of what the standards might look like. We'll then be making refinements to the standards based on the city's feedback we've received, and the city will work through an adoption process that will occur into next year. So here, I think I'm handing it briefly back to Laura.
Yep, thank you, Scott. Okay, so now I'll just review the instructions for how to participate during the discussion session. You can go to the next slide. All right, so you can use your raise hand icon to indicate if you'd like to speak, and when it's your turn to speak, we'll go ahead and unmute you. You can also use the Q&A function to type in your question or comment. If you are joining us by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand, and then you can press *6 to unmute once you've been called upon to speak. And just a reminder, in case you missed it earlier, we do have interpretation available during this meeting. You can click on the interpretation button in your webinar controls, and then everyone does need to select a language: English, Spanish, Chinese, or Vietnamese. Again, you do need to select English if you're listening in English. Okay, next slide. So here are a few guidelines for the public comment. We're generally asking that you limit your comments to about 2 minutes, just so that we give everyone a chance to speak. And please remember that abusive language is inappropriate. Please comply with this code of conduct throughout the course of the discussion session. Okay, Scott, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Laura. So hopefully we've given you an idea of what the project is about, and particularly for those newer folks who are just learning about SB9, or maybe have a little bit of familiarity about the context of it and the discussion that we're hoping to have here. So moving on to the discussion piece of the meeting. Firstly, we just wanted to pause for any questions about the presentation content. Was there anything in there that I might have gone over too quickly for you, or that might have needed clarification? Happy to go back to any slides if needed. Again, you can let us know if you have a question by either using the raise hand function or the Q&A box. So I'll pause there for a second just to allow folks in the background to identify hands up or Q&A box questions.
Yeah, I see we've got a raised hand from Sandra. So why don't we start there, if that's all right? Give me a moment.
Thank you for a very good, clear, concise presentation. There's one thing I think we should clarify, is that the owner does not have to live on the lot. He just needs to sign an attestation that he intends to live on the lot. And if he does not live on the lot, it's my understanding that there's really nothing legally that the city can do. Could you please confirm my understanding?
Yeah, I can take that. Yeah, so the language of the law is they have to sign an attestation that they intend to live on the lot for 3 years from the date of the subdivision. So that provision does apply to the subdivision only. And yeah, the language is that they intend to live there. So if they sign that declaration honestly at that time, that is the requirement under the law, and we don't have any mechanism to enforce that they actually do live there.
Okay. Sandra looks like she's got a follow-up. Hang on a second.
We had a number in the Q&A. Do we want to read some of the Q&A ones out as well?
That's fine. I'll wait till later.
Okay. Thank you, Sandra.
We do have certain comments from Sandra in the Q&A as well. One of the questions is whether the City Council has approved the standards for R1 and if this project only applies to R2. And if you're re-examining R1, could you let us know when this new project has been approved by the council? So that's one of the questions that we have.
Do you want me to take that one?
Sure, Martina.
Yeah, so, and I pulled up the minutes from the meeting right now just to make sure. So as part of the City Council's direction on opportunity housing back on December 14th, 2021, the staff recommendation that council accepted was to direct staff to develop citywide design standards for implementation of SB9. So that would cover the R1 district. So that was directed by council back then. In addition, council asked us to go further and also look at the R2 zoning districts and the historic properties. So those three things were directed back on December 14th, 2021 by council.
Thank you, Martina. I think that question came up twice in the Q&A. And there is one other question from Sandra again, that about the lawsuit that declared that SB9 was illegal for the 5 charter cities that sued. And our understanding is at this time, San Jose continues to implement SB9, and we are not subject to any additional changes at this point. There's one other question about there would be 8 cars minimum for the 4 units, and there is no on-site parking. Yes, that is correct. We do have an ordinance that removed the minimum parking requirement at this time. And a lot cannot be subdivided if adjacent to another lot split by SB9. Scott, would you like to address this from the presentation? It can be, you did explain that it can be done only once.
So I think there's a couple of things there. That the thing that can only be done once is a lot split of a lot. So you can't take a lot and split it multiple times via SB9. It's even if you have the area, it only provides a mechanism for one split. I think the other piece there that might have gotten caught up there, there's a requirement within SB9 that says the same owner cannot undertake a lot split on adjacent lots. So my understanding is that applies to the same ownership to avoid people buying up parcels next to each other and subdividing all of them. So I think where it comes to the adjacency aspect, if it's a different independent owner, I believe that's possible under SB9. It's when it's there is an existing owner with some sort of relationship with someone who might have done the same thing next door.
Scott, you may have another question to address here. The question is about the LA example. What was the impact on the rear and side neighbors? If through your research, if you had any understanding of that.
I can't speak for the neighbors, firstly. So I couldn't tell you exactly what their thoughts are. What I can do, let me try and go back to the slide there just to sort of talk about the setbacks that are involved, because that's sort of quite clearly what those neighbors would see the ramifications of. So obviously they have neighbors to the side, they have neighbors to the rear as well. These orange ADUs, there's 2 of them. They're located 4 feet off the boundary, off the side and rear boundary in this instance. From what I know of the adjoining structures, there's garages and other type ancillary buildings on either side of the fence there. Because they're one story as well, there is obviously a lesser chance of sort of privacy overlooking into those rear yards. Also, the SB9 unit in the middle is 2 stories. Now that obviously is sort of provides an elevated view, and privacy needs to be considered, and how it relates to the backyards and the rear of those houses as well. But yeah, again, not having spoken to those neighbors directly, I don't know if I can elaborate wholly on their thoughts. Maybe they're supportive, maybe they're not.
Thank you, Scott. And we have 2 other questions related to whether or not the empty lots, how would you identify if that's in a fire zone and it's not subject to SB9? And in this particular instance, yes, we do have an interactive map available, and you could also check with a planner if you need to determine whether it's not in a fire zone. And yes, and I think that should address some of the questions up until now, and we can go back to the live questions.
Yeah, we're going to switch back and forth between live and typed questions. So
Sure. We've got a raised hand from Atisha. If you'd like to go ahead.
Hey, this is Atisha. I'm a resident of San Jose. My question is more regarding if you do urban lot split. Could you guys explain how does the utilities work and what's the process of getting a new utility connection for the next lot? And maybe, and I think the tag on question is what's the overall city fees required in this process we should estimate?
can take a crack at that one. Fees is what we would have to look up. It would be dependent in some instances on your school district, the park area you're in, and the utility company's fees. So there's no one straight, what are the fees? It's very locational dependent, but that's a really good question. And I think we can, you know, kind of put together some fee information and you know, update people later on that. With regard to utilities, generally speaking, the utilities are private. So as you're planning your subdivision, you would actually need to work with your utility company. So PG&E, if you're in San Jose Water Company area, that's a private water company. You would need to work with them on a new meter. Generally speaking, those are the utilities. For us, when we create new lots, there is a process for getting new garbage service and sewage fees. Those do go through the city as part of the building permit process.
So just kind of follow-up question. So a new lot split will be subject to kind of an impact fee?
Yeah, it would be considered a new lot, so it would be subject to impact fees that would apply to a subdivision.
Okay. It will be good to have that information somewhere consolidated on city website because I could not find it anywhere.
Yeah, no, great feedback.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. Okay, Sandra, it looks like you've got another question here.
Hi. When the city council passed the ordinance to cover R1, they did have a maximum height of 20 feet within 20 feet of the rear property line. SB9, my understanding is, has 4 feet setbacks. Are you all considering eliminating that? Also, there was a maximum height of 30 feet, which is basically 2 stories. So there was an effort, and then there was an overall maximum 0.45 R that limits the total size of all the units constructed on a property. Can you let me know what you're considering changing? And you had a stakeholder or with some people who are very pro or have done SB9, and what was your feedback from them?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say we are open to looking at all of the standards, which is why definitely we want to hear from you on what's important I know from working for the city for 18 years, privacy is very important. So that's absolutely something we'll keep in mind as we're looking at it. But we are open to looking at all of the standards. And yeah, we did have a couple focus groups, one with people in the design space who have some experience with SB9, just to learn from their experiences, both in our jurisdiction and other jurisdictions, and as well as with some historic preservation advocates as well. We had a separate one to kind of go through some of the ideas around the historic aspect of it. Let me see a good way to summarize their feedback. I mean, I think generally speaking, what we're hearing from the community, there are some standards that make it challenging. One of them is the driveway requirement. If you're doing a subdivision to the rear lot, we've been asked to relook at that. I think generally speaking, the design community is kind of looking for I'll say less stringent standards, but yeah, a little bit more flexibility when it comes to volume, you know, kind of heights and whatnot. If anyone else wants to add to that.
Okay. Thank you, Sandra. Okay, we've got a question here from George.
Okay, I have a question on this charter city that Sandra already asked about. Since it's illegal to implement this to a charter city, why wouldn't we do the same things those other cities did, object to it, and then we implement standards that the residents want, not that the state's implementing? Why wouldn't we do that?
Yeah, so I mean, those cities did engage in litigation with the state over it. Whether the city wants to engage in litigation is really a council decision to make. So it's not something, a decision we would make on the staff level as of now. It's not something that's been done. So at this point, we're following the current council direction. Should council decide to, you know, push the brakes on it and engage in litigation, that would be something that they could do, but it wouldn't be something we would do at the staff level. And was
okay,
that
then also how can I determine whether an empty lot is in the fire zone? Who do I have to talk to?
so we do have it's actually state mapping, so it's the very high fire hazard severity zones. You can find that, I want to say, with the state fire marshal's map. We do have a map if you go to the city's map data that will show it. I'll share with you that there's surprisingly little of that in San Jose. I believe the only place within our actual city limits is a few properties kind of on the west side near Los Gatos, although those maps were updated recently and those properties may have been removed. So again, it would be the state's fire hazard severity maps. You can Google it and get to those, or you can find it on the city's map gallery as well. But yeah, just to kind of give you a preview, there's a surprise, there's basically none of that within the city limits. Once you get off the city limits, kind of on the east side, you start getting properties within those zones, but within the incorporated city, there really isn't much of that.
Well, who's determining if it's in a fire zone?
The state.
Pardon me?
The state of California.
Okay, so the city doesn't have any say over that?
The city has no say. It's a state mapping, and the law references the state zones that are mapped by the state.
Okay, thank you, George. Our next question is from Adam Mayberry. Go ahead, Adam.
Hi. Yeah, so I think I was just going to ask if there's consideration with the RM zone that's in residential neighborhood that essentially is single family zoned property because the RM zone cannot be utilized. Will SB9 be available in those zones?
Yeah, so as of right now, that's not part of the project. I think we can look at the overlap more often than not. The RM is over a much higher density general plan designation, but it may make sense to end up recommending kind of some unity where you've got single family properties across the city. So it's something we can look at, but it's not part of the project at this time.
So yeah, currently the RM like by right gives you a certain density criteria, but the residential neighborhood basically says you can't do that. So how does the city responding to the fact that it's not a multifamily zone property when
He
the
said that growth
residential
in dialect
neighborhood
that
is
Yeah, so again, we were asked to kind of look at that for R2, not for RM. I think, you're raising a good question. And if you do know of kind of properties or neighborhoods where that is, I think it's relatively rare, but it does exist out there. Maybe that would end up being our recommendation, just kind of unified standards where properties contain single family homes. But again, it's not technically part of our direction at this time.
yeah, they're mostly in the small property, dense, walkable neighborhoods around downtown. That would lend itself well to, well, that's really the only places that are RM in general where they wanted multifamily. So yeah, it's that's the only question. I don't know that there's many new standards being looked at here to comment on, but just seem like you're getting people's feedback on what has happened previously, I guess.
Yeah, this is, as I kind of said earlier, this is an introductory to meeting where we're letting people know what we're doing, answering questions on the background, and then any kind of general feedback people have, let us know your top concerns, questions, comments on this. That's the purpose of our meeting tonight. The next meeting will have more standards, or actual standards to look at.
Okay, thank you, Adam. And it looks like George might have another question here.
Yes, can you explain the parking requirements again that are required?
The city of San Jose does not have mandatory minimum parking requirements, so there are no parking requirements.
So is this staff going to recommend any parking requirements or have none?
The council did just adopt the ordinance. So, we haven't formed a recommendation yet, so I cannot tell you 100% where it will be, but I'll tell you unlikely. But, let us know, right, if parking's a concern. But given that the city did just adopt the no minimum parking requirement ordinance, it's not likely we would recommend changes to that.
So can you recommend something in this group if the people are telling you they want parking limitations or no?
I mean, staff could recommend things. There are some limitations. Yeah, no, I mean, we could, right? So again, we're getting feedback. So, and at minimum, we could transmit to the council that this was a big concern. It's something they could consider.
Okay,
So,
can you
if parking's a concern, let us know, right? So at minimum, your decision makers will know that that's a concern.
Okay, so you can recommend that's a concern?
Yeah, I mean, we'll definitely, if it is a concern we hear, we'll definitely at minimum convey that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you again, George. Sandra.
So gracious with me, thank you. Martina, you probably remember a lot of the discussions about opportunity housing and the number of meetings we had, and then it getting superseded by SB9. But on a personal level, I thought what the planning department and what you specifically presented in November, December of 2021 with such clear presentations and pictures. I thought it was such a reasonable compromise that we came up with. Although I'm sure some builders and developers would like to not have the setbacks that you recommended for single story, and limiting it to 4 units instead of up to 10 if we had combined it with the amounts allowed by San Jose City at the time with ADUs and smaller ADUs. I hope that the staff will continue to remember the discussions we had in 21 and the mobilization of neighborhoods to try to come up with something reasonable. As you look at this, please remember our discussions in 21. Thank you.
Thank you. And Aparna, do we want to start looking at any of the questions in the Q&A box?
We could possibly take a couple more questions here because most of those are repetitive at this point.
Okay. Okay. Sure. Atisha?
Hey, so because I'm from a design community and this would be just a recommendation for the study to look at, and also detail out, as you know, like when we are looking at a 10,000 square feet lot, what does that lot looks like if we have to build it 100% with an ADU, which is like 4,000 square feet house with another 1,200. No one is going to own a 5,200 square feet house in San Jose, or it's just not feasible to own that. So pretty much SB9 is allowing us is to take that buildable volume and just to make it into 4 units. And that might really help community understand that we are really not increasing the overall allowable building area so much through SB9, and some of that analysis and those graphics might be really helpful in the study as well. I'm not sure if you guys have already looked at it, but I've done my own analysis on the site, and I see, it's easy to explain to people that way. And, also specifying allowable FARs, like SB9 does not include some of that, design standards that clearly need right now. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
I do see some kind of new questions in the SB
Right.
in the chat. Do you mind if I just kind of answer some of the ones that are not
Sure.
repetitive? So we have one from Mr. Lawrence Ames. So I'll just this first one. SJ has a monster house ordinance that limits a fraction of the lot that can be developed. The FAR floor area ratio. Does SB9 impact that? So when we adopted the SB9 standards back in 2021, the ordinance does carry over that floor area ratio requirement to SB9. It doesn't include ADUs. The law exempts them from any floor area ratio, and it can be exceeded to allow the 800 square foot units that we are required to allow. But generally speaking, yeah, for most SB9 projects under our current ordinance would be subject to that 0.45. And it was kind of a collective 0.45 between the 2 units. Next question, will the city continue processing existing and new SB9 applications while the objective standards are being established? Yes, we have no option to cease SB9 processing. It's a state law. We're required to implement it. And then I'll do one more. Can driveways be shared so that the rear lot can use the same driveway as the main house? Yes, absolutely. The ordinance as is does allow shared driveways, and we would encourage that because it does reduce the amount of pavement and impervious surface. So it is something that we would encourage. And then one last question from Lawrence Ames, kind of building on that. So building more housing on a lot will result in a larger portion of the lot being impermeable. What's the impact on water runoff and flood protection measures? Yeah, typically stormwater control measures don't apply until you get over a certain threshold of size. So strictly speaking, those kind of bioswales and whatnot you see on larger developments would not apply here. That said, it's a good question, right? SB9 is interesting. It does require us to allow all the way to 4-foot side and rear setbacks. So in some ways, kind of the fact that they can build most of the lot is already decided. But, I think that's something we can look at as part of this project, right? Is there a way to encourage more impermeable or permeable surfaces in developments?
thanks, Martina. I do see that we have one more raised hand here from Brenda.
Hi, yes, I don't know if you already addressed this question, but with regards to no minimum parking, did you consider neighborhoods that do not have any sidewalks? Is that a consideration with SB9? And also a second question, is the city pushing back at all on SB9 with the state, given that many residents are not really pleased with this state bill that was passed? Are you guys pushing back at all? Are you talking to the state, taking residents pushback at all? Hello?
So I can.
We heard you. Yeah, go ahead, Martina.
Yeah, and you're gonna have to remind me, I started thinking so much about your second question, I already kind of lost your first one, so I'll start with the second one. Oh, I do remember the first one, but let me start with the second one anyways, the city pushing back. So, you know, how to respond to state legislation, that is a decision of the council. There is a city legislative program, it goes to council twice a year. So kind of those decisions are made at that time and through that context typically. At this point, we don't have any direction from council to push back on this. We are going with the direction we have, which is to, you know, reevaluate our standards to make sure they work, and then look at expanding SB9 type projects into R2 and the historic areas. And then your first question with regard to neighborhoods that don't have sidewalks. You know, I mean, typically you don't park on the sidewalk. So I think you're kind of maybe talking about ones that have like red curbs, or, you know, are too narrow for street parking. Again, you know, we did go ahead and council, you know, did approve an ordinance update last year to remove mandatory minimum parking requirements city lot wide. So that is regardless of sidewalks or not. Now, typically when a property is developed, particularly when it's subdivided, we do often look for a sidewalk to be installed at that point. So in this sense, you might actually end up seeing more sidewalks as part of this, assuming the state law doesn't supersede our ability to do that.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, I don't see any more raised hands at the moment.
I have a quick follow-up on the Q&A here. There was a question regarding the maps. I have attached a link here, but at the same time, I'd like to let attendees know that we could send out a follow-up email, and that we will send you some links that you can look at. So there are some interactive maps available on the city's website and also the Public Works page. You could refer to that, and also there is a Santa Clara County interactive map as well for any information related to SB9 eligibility. And at the same time, I think there are a few questions here about the parking. Again, I think this is a city council direction, and the parking right now, there are no minimums. And I think there's one other question that we have here about the impacts on services like sewers. This would function as any other new development in the city. So if there is additional capacity required, then the owner or the potential applicant would have to address that capacity sooner in the process before the development permit is issued. So this would be addressed like any other city's development.
Yeah, and to add, we had a question as well on impact and park fees. It's generally the same. So subdivisions and new units are subject to impact fees, and that includes park impact fees and sewer impact fees. So like any other, you know, new units in the city, they would be subject to those impact fees, which would then, you know, go into funding additional parks or sewage capacity as needed.
But we are taking note of your concerns related to the parks and the impacts on the services. And we will definitely take those comments in. And what we would really appreciate would be any additional comments that you may have for drafting the development standards. And at this point, this objective design standards would give us sort of a tool to implement on both R1 and R2 zoning districts at this point. So anything that you may talk to us about open space or trees or any other concerns that you may have would be very helpful before we move into the drafting of the standards.
And I do see that Sandra has her hand raised here again. Let's see.
And thank you for mentioning that, but the city of San Jose has lost a lot of tree canopy. I think we could lose more depending on how much SB9 development. We need to look at that. Also, I get a little concerned. Even though we have, there's very little, high fire hazard areas in San Jose. I am concerned because some of my neighbors and friends in other areas have actually lost their homeowners insurance due to fire concerns. And we're going to be densifying in that area, which should have impact on our fire department and fire services. We already have a depleted police department. I just think there's a lot of impacts here that we need to look at or need to be considered. The other thing is the city did do a study, and the reason that SB9 was declared for the 5 cities that filed suit was they said they were doing this to get more affordable housing, and even the city study informed that it would just produce market rate housing. So I think there's a lot going on here, and there may be consequences that we haven't thought of. My understanding, and I could be totally wrong on this, is that we lost some lawsuit on pollution of our creeks, and that requires or is requiring some changes to our sewer or change outs of sewer lines. So if we're changing sewer lines out and we're going to densify this area, then we need to maybe think about making those changes now and look farther out as to what these impacts could be. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott?
So if we do have a pause there, I have progressed it to sort of the next phase of the discussion piece, which we've sort of crossed over into already. So what we have here is just some prompting questions for the types of input that we're hoping to hear from you, and some that we've already heard, particularly in relation to some of those points of tree canopy and parking and setbacks and things. These are just guiding questions, which I'll leave on the screen for now, which hopefully they'll prompt anyone to sort of raise any points or concerns or suggestions you have in the last few minutes that we have here. But please let us know any of your feedback about any of these things along these lines.
And I'll also mention, I think we'll probably get to this on the next slides. Definitely, if you didn't think of anything tonight and you think of it later, please feel free to send us an email. We'll have our contact information and let us know. So this won't be your only opportunity to provide us feedback if you aren't, you're not thinking of it right now, but you'll wake up tomorrow morning and you're like, wow, I wish I said that. Please send us an email, let us know.
I'd like to add that we do have a web page, and that has a lot of information that went out in the email blast to all of the attendees as well. We'll make sure that we'll follow up with an additional email which has those links again. So please make sure that you follow those that web page. and it will include a copy of the presentation as well. So you'll be able to refer to all of the discussions today, and then you reach out to us with any additional questions. And I think some of the questions that we have noted is related to the general impacts of the densification, and we'll definitely take notes on that. Thank you.
Brenna, I don't know if you just answered this, but we had a question earlier if we plan to put the recording of this meeting on our website. Can you clarify that?
Yes, I had already addressed that, and yeah, that we're going to be adding it to the web page. And yes, please feel free to browse through that page and then and also ask us if you have any questions.
Okay, want to check we don't have any last hands up or Q&A questions before we move to wrap up.
There are no raised hands at the moment. I'll check with Aparna to see if there's any additional questions in the Q&A box that you'd like to address.
So there's one additional question about the slides. Yes, the entire presentation will be available, and possibly a recording of this meeting as well.
Let's see. Okay, we've got George does have a final question here. Just a moment.
Okay, I just want to emphasize, can you please put in there should be parking limits. You can't just be building something when there isn't adequate parking. So can you please put that comment in?
Comment noted, George, for sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we hear you, and you know, definitely that's something we're hearing in the chat as well. So it sounds like parking is definitely a concern for many of these.
Okay, thank you.
Tonight. So yeah, we hear you.
Thank you. And it looks like Sandra's got a final comment here.
I wrote some items in the
Okay.
in the chat in terms of evacuation routes. And we're going to be increasing traffic. That's going to increase maintenance on our roads. We may need to look at the maintenance cycle on particular roads. But evacuation routes, we had a fire near here and there was only one road in or out. And it caused quite a bit of problems trying to get people out because of a arson set fire.
Yeah, we'll definitely do some coordination with the fire department to get more information and answers on those issues.
Thank you, Sandra.
And as indicated earlier, we are not proposing to change any of the height requirements at this point. But if you have any specific concerns, or if you have any thoughts on of any further development standards in terms of the setbacks, heights, roof, let us know.
I mean, at this point, I don't know that we can say 100% we're not going to look at height requirements. What I'll share is, you know, height and coverage are kind of two sides of the scale, right? If you limit coverage to get those units that we're required to allow, you know, that tends to push the buildings higher. But limiting coverage of the lot can be good, right? Because you protect trees, less, you know, surface, less paved surface, right? So there is a trade-off there. So, you know, I can't tell you 100% we're not going to look at that trade-off and see, you know, does it make sense to adjust some of the heights in that kind of a scenario. But yeah, we definitely hear you about, you know, kind of liking what was adopted. And I thank you. I did most of the drafting of those. So we definitely hear that comment around heights being a concern.
Turn it back over to you, Scott.
Okay. Well, if we don't have anything else in the Q&A and no more hands, then I think we can wrap up. I mean, again, thank you everyone for your input, your questions today. I hope we've given you some context of the project and how you can continue to be involved. Please, as we sort of showed just on the slide before this, you can also reach out via email to us as we proceed over the next couple months. So thanks again for your time, and you'll hear from us again.